Hello, everyone out there. We are live again on the Zodcast, of course, at our usual regular time. Apologize again for last week. I had some power issues in the neighborhood. It was a piece of equipment that went down, but fortunately, our guest will be able to join us again. She was able to reschedule, so I'm really appreciative of that. But it was a strange thing. I think it did come back on maybe 20 minutes later for good, but I wasn't sure if it was going to last and have to keep everything going. So I didn't want to do the show from my phone because I had slides. You guys know that I use quite a bit and kind of rely on the slides that help things move along. So we're back, but I'm glad to see a lot of the regulars in the chat, a few new people. Hey, Darnell. Hey, Keith. Haven't seen you in a little while, but we did talk not too long ago, Keith. Of course, Squeezer's not going to miss one. Yes, we're going to be talking about the Eureka card, which is going to be good. Hey, Zap, Norjack, everybody, Fu Man, Jen, of course. It's nice having my sister as a regular viewer to the show, but we'll let the signal go out a little longer because sometimes it takes 3 or 4 minutes for everybody to get the YouTube signal out, depending what you're using. But this is going to be good because this is one of the subjects I really like. Of course, my core Zodiac stuff, but outside of that, I like, the Chester Clark Klingel thing's very interesting to me. So is Freaky Fred Manali, and it's just some things that I like more than others in this case, and this is one of them. So I'm bringing on Julia McGann, who knows all things Chester Clark Klingel very, very well. She's been on Ned's show about, I think, 6 months ago or so. He had her on talking about the same subject, and since the time that she's gone on to Ned's show, of course, good friend Ned DeHaan at Black Box Online Radio, she's uncovered more stuff regarding Chester Clark Klingel. And she was referred to me, of course, by a good mutual friend of ours, Druser. We all know Druser, great researcher himself. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on Julia, and we're going to start diving into, of course, the famous Chester Clark Klingel. So, hey, Julia, how are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good having you on. Like I was mentioning before, it's just something I've always liked. It's just kind of an interesting caveat in the Zodiac case that there's so many of them that that people can kind of pick and choose what they like, and this was one. One reason is a guy that goes by baseball. Mr. Baseball 2 on Reddit, real smart guy. And he's kind of a big fan of maybe Chet being Zodiac. Of course, that's his number 2. Of course, his number 1, he agrees with me. He's kind of a Cheney Allen guy like I am. But that being said, I'm interested in the whole Chester Clark Klingel thing and the Eureka card. So let's start. And I'm going to put a picture of the card up. And this is what we call the Eureka card. And of course, it says from your secret pal. And as we all know, that's a phrase that Zodiac had in the Halloween card that was sent to Paul Avery at the San Francisco Chronicle. So give us a little background on the card. I know that was sent into the San Francisco Chronicle in 1990, was it?
Yeah, so that card was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle sometime in December of 1990. We don't know the exact date. The postmark isn't very readable, but you can tell definitely that's December of 1990. And of course, it's a Christmas-themed card. But it shares many similarities in theme and construction to the Halloween card that the Zodiac sent in October of 1970. Like, for example, the most obvious one would be the secret pal mention, but also just sort of this construction of like, I'm going to say, if you look inside of this, then there's going to be a clue. And then on the inside, like it's sort of like a setup and punchline. On the Halloween card, it says, I can feel it in my bones. You ache to know my name. And so I'll clue you in. And you have to open the card to see, but then why spoil our game? In this
Very
one,
similar.
It says from your secret pal, see you haven't found out who I am yet. Look inside and you'll find out. And then you open it, it's that I'm going to keep you guessing. Happy holidays anyway. The last one, of course, the Halloween card says Happy Halloween. This one says Happy Holidays. So it's very
similar.
It's similar. It's like, it seems like something that Zodiac would do. And I don't know if it had been opened already. It was somebody filed this in with the potential Zodiac related materials, the Chronicle. In 2007, when they were doing research for the documentary that was the counterpart for the DVD release movie, then they found Kevin Fagan of the Chronicle found this card again, and that's when it came back to light. And it was drawn to the attention of Tom Voigt, who sort of took it and ran with it. He was the one who was able to find out what the numbers on the keys in the photocopy were, and then he was able to take that to the Eureka post office and
Right.
find
So like, for people that don't know yet, with the card, inside the card, of course, it was a greeting card that opened up. Inside was a Xerox copy of 2 post office box keys. And here's a picture of. I mean, this has been the picture I have. Somebody actually filled in the numbers because you can't see that on the Xerox that came with them. But this was later, I guess, filled in because there was 2 keys with 2 different serial numbers, right?
Yeah, I would also, minor detail, but the numbers that are filled in there aren't exactly accurate. It's actually 79408 on the left one.
So you know your stuff. I like that. You know them well.
But
there was no ambiguity, right, with what the numbers were. I mean, it was like, you were kind of guessing what this could be, a 2 or a 4.
Yeah, and also both of the post office keys belonged to Chester Klingel. Now, one of them belonged to Chester Klingel Jr., and I believe one of them may have belonged to Chester Klingel III, which is actually the suspect's son. But they were both post office keys in Eureka for the Klingels. And so Tom Voigt went and he looked for that name in the Eureka directory, and he actually lucked out, because if it had been in 1990 and he looked for the Eureka directory, he would not have found Chester Klingel at all, because
he wasn't yet living in Eureka, correct?
Yeah, in 1990, when this card was sent, he was actually living in Rio Vista, California, which is just over by like Stockton, Antioch, sort of like halfway point between those 2 cities. So he was like 5 hours away. So if he was Zodiac, then he's probably thinking he's slick going up to this city hours away from his home, where his daughter lived at the time, and sending this.
Yeah, he had a daughter that did live there at the time, and I think you verified that, or somebody did. They were able to verify the name of his daughter.
That was Chris Cross that was able to verify that his daughter Sandra, as far back at least as 1989, had been living in Eureka. So in 1990, she would have been living there. She was married at the time. She was not Sandra Klingel any longer. She was Sandra Zabrowski, I believe, because she was married to a cyclist named Lars Zabrowski, and they both participated in the Tour of the Century ride, a bike marathon, whatever you call that, cyclist competition. And interestingly, another cyclist in that competition was a guy some people might know named Lance Armstrong, but he wasn't famous yet at the time.
So she was good. She was a good triathlete, or
yeah, and so she made the papers in Eureka in 1989 for that competition. So she lived there definitely in 1990. Klingel, however, did not. He had 2 homes. One of them was in Rio Vista, and one of them was in Murphy's, California, on Sandalwood Drive. And I think and then it's St. Andrew's Drive in Rio Vista. So he was going out of his way to send this, if he is, I'm assuming he's the sender in this case.
Wow. So as the story goes, Tom finds out somehow that this box is linked to Chester, or Chester is the owner of the box. That was either him, or with some aide was able to call. I never heard like how exactly do they keep that on file somewhere? Would that even be public?
So the story goes that he played a little bit of trickery, pretended that he found some lost keys. The person behind the counter, of course, this is a small town. They're not suspicious that somebody's trying to hunt somebody down. And they just sort of look up whose keys they are. He sees the name on the computer screen, Chester Klingel, and then he goes right to look up if there's a Chester Klingel who lives in Eureka. And by that time, he had moved up there. It
like 92-ish.
Like he may have moved. No, because in 97 he was still living in Rio Vista, so I think he moved as like 1998, maybe even 2001, because that's the first time that I have property records of him there, but he could have moved to live with his daughter before getting his own place. So I know that he lived in Rio Vista still in 97, so he could have moved as soon as 98, but I can't definitively place him there until 2001.
Okay.
But by
So
2007, he was living there.
so after Tom gets the information, I guess he informs the police, and the police at some point go question him, and I think got a handwriting sample and a DNA sample out of the garbage or something. How they typically do, they'll get a discarded DNA or something. Is that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
how that happened?
They got not a subpoena, but a warrant to find samples of his handwriting, just on government documents, things that they readily have. They did a comparison, which apparently was inconclusive, but like it was good enough that they moved straight to let's DNA test this guy. And so they got a warrant to go search through his trash to find what they call a surreptitious DNA sample. So he has forfeited his right to privacy by depositing these items outside, which is kind of nefarious constitutionally speaking, but I won't get into that. But they dig through his trash and they find a Q-tip with earwax and a tissue and a cup with a straw in it. And each of those items yield different male DNA profiles. So there was 3 different contributors to those 3 different items. So they just take all of those profiles and then they take a composite profile, which is actually a combination of 3 different partial DNA samples that they found on stamps on one of the July 31st, or rather July 30th, 1969 Zodiac letters. And
Wow.
So if you assume, number one, that one of those 3 different male DNA profiles in his trash was from him, and number 2, that all 3 of those partial DNA profiles from those stamps are all from Zodiac and complete each other, then the negative result of the test would exclude Klingel. But I'm not that confident in either of the DNA samples.
No, and
Personally.
we'll talk about that some more because that's something else I definitely wanted to talk to you about. You know, in more in general with the forensics, of course, that I know you know well. So, so they get. So was Klingel ever confronted by police? Like, hey, will you give us one? You know, a willing DNA sample, or this is why we're doing this? Do you know if they ever confronted him?
That's where we get into rumor territory, because there's no like official record of Klingel being questioned by the police. There's no transcript of any interview. But the rumor is that he was contacted by police at some point. He may have confessed to sending the card. That gets into a whole rumor thing.
Wow.
Of, according to Tom Voigt's sources, that Klingel was confirmed as the sender of the card through unknown means. So I can only imagine what that would mean, but there's no official record of him having been contacted by the police that I can confirm. I know that he was contacted by Tom Voigt. He was interviewed by Tom Voigt. We have Voigt's side of what happened in that conversation, and he says that he recorded it as well, but he's not shared recordings.
So what did he tell Tom in the interview? What was the gist of it?
He told Tom that he lost those keys a number of years ago. He doesn't know where they went off to. And when he was told that this was all because of Zodiac, then he allegedly said, "Am I on his little list?" as well.
Wow. Of course, a Mikado reference, of course.
Yeah, which also goes back to the sort of Groucho Marx imagery on the card.
Yeah, I'll go back. Let me go back to that so people can see it. Of
Because
course, you have the the Groucho, what they call the Groucho glasses and the nose, which were kind of, even outside of attributing to Groucho Marx, which of course is where they started, they were just known as the Groucho glasses. I think they were used quite a bit
Right.
but obviously a connection to Groucho Marx, and then we'll get into that too because might as well now. So everybody knows, the people that watch this show know Zodiac pretty well, and the references to the Mikado, of course, in the Exorcist letter, and of course, the Little List letter, which is directly from the Mikado. But I think it was Missy Johansson, who, of course, is Tahoe 27 online, who I think it was her that first suggested that the lines that Zodiac was quoting from the Mikado sounded like the Groucho Marx version of the Mikado, because Groucho did a version of the Mikado, of course, live, and it was recorded and I think shown on TV. And she felt that the lines that Zodiac was quoting, because they weren't like verbatim from the original Gilbert and Sullivan play, because there's so many iterations of the Mikado, but she felt they came from the Groucho Marx version. I think that's where that comes from, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the connection to the Groucho, right?
Yeah, because there's a whole bunch of different versions of the exact wording of the Little List song, none of which Zodiac exactly gets right. It also seems like, now this I am quoting from, oddly enough, Anton LaVey. He was interviewed by the Vallejo Times Herald in the 80s. And he said that he thought that the Zodiac was he was listening to a recording of the Mikado, and that he got words wrong phonetically, because the words that Zodiac got wrong were sound-alike words to the words, but not words you would get wrong if you had been reading it. So I think,
so he's going from his memory of knowing it, and of course he would spell words wrong phonetically, as we know.
Yeah, so it's like, LaVey pretty much denounced the idea that Zodiac had ever performed the Mikado anywhere, because he said he would have known the words if that was the case. And the words that he got wrong were like, if you understood the song, you would never mess them up. So I don't think that Zodiac is like some huge like fan that knows everything about the Mikado or anything like that.
Or played the role, because I remember for a while they were looking for people that may have played, I guess, Coco, the Lord High Executioner. I'm not sure what character
And
sang Little List, but they were actually looking for people that may have played the role in high school or college, or maybe even professionally. And of course, it went nowhere.
And that's what LaVey was commenting on, was that was a fruitless endeavor, because if he had played the role, he would know the words more accurately.
So that, that's obviously bringing in Groucho is how the tie is to Zodiac, because as we know, the card does not say it's from Zodiac. So that's one thing that comes up a lot. If it was, let's say, Chester Klingel is Zodiac, wouldn't he have put that on there? But I guess that argument goes both ways, because we know how weird the Zodiac would be. He might just do it just as a haha at you, and not even need to put the cross circle or I'm Zodiac, or even say this is the Zodiac speaking, and just not make it so obvious. But that's one of the things that comes up with this card, is why wouldn't he have not put something that says 100% this is Zodiac?
Yeah, I also think the question goes, because when you said it could also be reversed, it would be, if this was a hoax that was imitating Zodiac, then why not put Zodiac anywhere on the card? Like, if this is a hoaxer who's going out of their way, as if it was a hoax it would be, and people assume that he's going so far as to trace the handwriting of Zodiac, even though you cannot find any Zodiac handwriting that matches.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about the tracing. I forgot about that. I'm glad you brought it up, the tracing, because that comes from it being so close to another correspondence, right? I can't remember which one.
Oh, the allegations of tracing actually don't have to do with it matching up directly with another one. It has to do with the fact that you can tell on the HD scans of the card that it was written in pencil first and then gone over several times.
Okay.
So I would say the most likely explanation for that is because it's a dark red envelope, and if you're using a light colored pencil, it's not going to stand out enough. So I think a lot of us have had the experience of, you write in pencil on too dark of an envelope, and then you go over it a bunch of times and just sort of follow the indent with the pen and fill it in. There was also the same type of overwriting by Zodiac on the Halloween card.
That's what I was thinking about.
So that's just a similar writing characteristic, not like a similar, like it's traced. But I would say it's not traced because there are some differences between the handwriting here and in the 69 to 74 Zodiac letters. Like, most significantly, I would say, is the letter R here is not a check mark R like the Zodiac would normally do, but it's sort of just straight up and then over. Otherwise, the writing it's just about as different as you would expect for, what, 40 years having passed, I guess, 30 years. Is it even 30 years? Is it 20 years?
Yeah,
20 years.
like 26 years from The Exorcist.
Yeah. So your handwriting can change pretty significantly in that time. Klingel would have gone from his late 40s to about retirement age in that time. So maybe his writing was not precisely the same as it used to be. If you look at some of Klingel's writing, like, for example, on his military forms, it shows a lot of striking similarities to the Zodiac, the most notable difference being the construction of the lowercase letter A. But other than that, everything is constructed in the same way. And then
It's interesting.
Even by his social security application, and this would be the difference.
I think that's the one. I have seen that. I have seen his social. Maybe you posted or somebody did on Tapatalk. Or I'm sure I've seen that, and some of the writing's not bad. It's not. I can see how they couldn't conclusively say completely different, like I've heard before. Oh, we just lost her. Let's see if she can jump back on. Hey, Ronnie, how are you? Good seeing you. Hey, Tom. Hey, Brant. Yeah, I definitely highly recommend Michael Cole's trilogy, Zodiac Revisited. That's a great set of books. Makes a lot of good observations there. Hey, Jerome. Glad you stayed up, man. I'll catch up on the chat while she tries to get back on. What time is it there, Jerome? 4? It's even later, isn't it? You keep some late hours, my friend. Anyway, I'll keep in her stead. I'll keep going on Chester a little. Is he had a strange life. He his son got killed in a car wreck. Chester Jr. got killed. He was a Marine. He got killed in a head-on collision. His guys had like all these weird tragedies. His wife, I think it was Belanda, and if Julie comes back on, she knows this better than I do, was killed. I don't know the year, but when they were driving somewhere in California, there was a deer or something in the road, and it crashed through the car somehow and killed it. I think he was married 3 times, and I think that was his second wife was killed that way. And I think there might have been another crazy tragedy. I mean, that's bad enough, your wife getting killed by an animal in the road, and then your son's also killed in a head-on collision. I think his son was early 20s. Chester Jr. was. So it's really strange stuff. Of course, he was a merchant Marine. I was going to ask her about that. He was a merchant Marine when he was young. He wanted to join the military. I think he was 14, 15. Of course, merchant Marine is not like a regular Marine. It's these guys that go out and work on boats and stuff overseas. So it's kind of like being in the military, but it's not. And then, of course, when you talk about merchant Marines in the Zodiac case, you think of the whole Robert Tarbox. If you remember that, the whole Tarbox was a lawyer in the Bay Area, not to be confused with Melvin Belli. It's a different one that Zodiac's associated with. But Tarbox claimed that someone came to him claiming to have been the Zodiac Killer and that they were a merchant Marine. He was, he supposedly told Tarbox what his name was, but Tarbox never repeated the name because it was attorney-client privilege. And when people found out that Chester Clark Klingel was a merchant Marine, some people thought maybe that's who Tarbox was talking about. So it could be. I think merchant Marine comes up before another time in the Zodiac case, but of course Tarbox got disbarred later on. I'm not really sure what reason, but he did. And Yeah, Tarbox is a weird last name, and that was his real last name. But it's weird. Like, why would he? If Zodiac was such a fan of Melvin Belli, why wouldn't he go to Belli? Why would he? Why would he go to Tarbox? So I kind of wondered that too, because we know the whole Belli connection. There's Julia again. Okay, you're back. You're back.
Sorry, my phone died.
Oh, no problem. Happens all the time. So yeah, while you were gone, I was I started filling in all the bits and pieces. I know. Oh, we lost her again. But yeah, I'll ask her about that. Like, why would you be a Belli and then go back? And of course, Belli's the one that they had when there was a caller to the Jim Dunbar show, and they had Belli there when the guy called in. I can't remember what they called the guy. Of course, that turned out not to be Zodiac. They found out it was a mental patient that had called into the show, but they were, they know he was interested in Belli, so they went and got Melvin Belli to help try to find the Zodiac. So one of the things that comes up with him. Yes, you're right, Julius. Is Belanda Sarkis. I know she has a son. He's still out there. I wonder if anybody's ever talked to him. I think his name's Bert. I think he's in the marijuana business. I mean, maybe I know a little more about him than I lead on, but it is interesting, no doubt. But yeah, Belanda was this. What was the third wife? I don't remember, but the letter has the correct postage. Yeah, look at on the postage. It's a Christmas stamp. It would have been really stuck out like a sore thumb if they had used an Apollo stamp that we know the Zodiac liked. But yeah, the postage. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good observation there.
All right, now I'm back.
You're back, and now somebody just brought up something interesting to me that I could run past you. Yeah, I talked about real quick when you were gone how Chester was a merchant marine, and how that might tie into the whole Tarbox confession, where Robert Tarbox, the lawyer, said that he talked to Zodiac and they confessed to him and gave the name, but he couldn't release it. But he said it was a merchant marine. Of course, Chester Clark Klingel was a merchant marine at 14 or 15, like that young. I guess you could get into that.
Yeah,
maybe?
he was a merchant marine from the age starting at the age of 15 is when he signed up, and then he got back. So he would not have been a merchant marine in the early 70s when Tarbox would have been talking about this. I don't know whether to believe Tarbo's story or not. Of course, he's a disbarred lawyer.
Yeah, I mentioned that he was disbarred. And another thing I brought up is that we know Zodiac kind of had like Melvin Belli, so why wouldn't he go to Belli, or at least try to?
Yeah,
over
and I know that,
Tarbox.
somebody mentioned something about the fact that like if Belli's office was closed, Tarbox's or Tarbo's was just down the street, and like maybe he goes for the Walmart version. Maybe he went to Belli and his office was closed or whatever, and he goes down the street to like the cheaper attorney. I also don't discount the possibility that somebody who was not Zodiac went to Tarbo and told him that he was Zodiac, and maybe that happened and he believed him and it just wasn't true.
Oh, highly plausible.
There was multiple people who claimed to be Zodiac over the years. They can't all be Zodiac, obviously. So I don't think that if Klingel walked in and pulled out a merchant marine card of his 14-year-old self and showed it to Tarbox, that would have passed the smell test. So I do mention that Klingel was a merchant marine, but not for the reason that a lot of people think that I'm bringing it up.
So what's a good reason to bring it up? I mean, for anything that may, outside of that story, which I agree with you, I don't put a whole lot into his, he's a disbarred lawyer, but what's positive about it other than maybe something like if he wasn't in the military per se, it's something close, right?
Oh, so he was in the military, but he wasn't in the Navy. Now there's some things pertaining to specifically the Navy with Zodiac, and Klingel did work on Navy ships, although he was not technically in the Navy. He eventually joined the Army, and he trained in Texas, and then he was
That's right.
stationed at the Presidio. Actually, he was stationed at the Presidio. He worked just blocks from the Presidio in 1969. He grew up on his childhood home, 115 2nd Street, San Francisco, is in Presidio Heights. His family is buried at the Presidio National Graveyard, or is it the Presidio National Cemetery? So his connections to Presidio Heights and the Presidio are numerous.
Yeah, he definitely knew the neighborhood.
Yeah, and he worked at 3333 California Street, which was just 3 blocks up, or 3 blocks down and 3 blocks over from the Stein crime scene. I know there was somebody who was talking about that, who thought that Zodiac was obsessed with the number 3. And then I found out that Klingel's home in Presidio Heights from when he was a child was also 3 blocks over and 3 blocks down, just the other way. I don't know about the Zodiac being obsessed with the number 3, but there's lots of things that pop up like that sometimes, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, or just happens. So when he was working in the Presidio, is that when he was in the insurance industry? Was it the Fireman's Fund? I'm just going.
Oh yeah, so he worked for Fireman Fund Insurance.
Wow, my memory's holding up. It's amazing.
And so he worked for that in 1969. He worked there from 1958 until 1975.
Wow.
And
so he was there during the whole Stein and a long time.
Yeah, and in the Army, he was based at the Presidio Army base.
So he's got Presidio down.
Yeah, he was doing radar repair, so he was a radar technician. And he also worked at a place called Hanford Plutonium Works in Seattle, Washington. But I don't know what he did there. I'm still trying to pin that one down, but I imagine something to do with plutonium. He also worked at North American Aviation in Los Angeles. And interestingly, at one time, he both worked, and he was developing oscilloscopes there at North American.
I recall that, yeah.
So
he's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he did a lot of different
and then
sort of technical work.
Oh yeah, and then in the 80s, he started a company. He co-founded a company called Agra Earth Stations. And they were, if you lived in Turlock, California, and you wanted TV at your house, you had to go see Chet Klingel. There was no other way to get TV at your house, because there was no cable companies that went out there, and they installed satellites. So if you lived in Turlock in the 80s and you had a TV, at some point you crossed paths with Chester Klingel. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
That is interesting.
So that company went from 83 until 86. And he co-founded it with
leading up to the card being mailed.
Right, which also the card being mailed coincides with the funeral of his son.
Right, I mentioned that when you were off. I mentioned that his son, which was junior, right? Or he wasn't the third; he was junior, correct? His son.
Yeah. Oh, so he's junior, and his son is the third.
Oh, okay. I thought I screwed that up. Okay, so Chet, that we're looking at now, the older gentleman, is junior. Then his son was the third, who was a regular Marine, correct? And he was killed in a head-on car accident.
Yeah, so he was actually on his way to a friend's wedding in Idaho, and he was on his way back from a fishing trip in Alaska. And he ended up rolling his truck 3 times, and him and his friend and another person died. And that crash happened in Burley, Idaho. And I was able to find out that the same day that his son died, that he actually closed down Agra Earth Stations. So
was when he was doing the Agra? Was that when he was still in Turlock, or where was he then?
He was still in Turlock, and he was installing satellites on people's houses. And his business partner was a man named Daryl Ryan. And initially, the address of the business was just Klingel's house, 6413 East Keys Road in Houston, adjacent
Right.
to Turlock. And then it moved to 8330 Golden Gate Boulevard, still in Turlock.
It's
But
interesting.
yeah,
Because you said Keys Road, and it reminded me of one thing I'd be remiss without mentioning that people haven't heard before. Of course, Keys Road makes me think of the keys in the card. But I don't know if it was Richard Grinnell, of course, who writes about it on zodiacciphers.com, was the guy that invented photocopying at Xerox was, I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Chet, correct? I mean, that's another tie in there with the Xerox, because of course Chester Clark Klingel went by the name Chet. So no, it's Chester something that invented the Xerox. I can't remember. He's probably yelling through his computer right now. But
along the lines of Chester Browning. I think it's something
yeah,
like that.
So that's another tie in there, though, that he's sending a Xerox, and the inventor of the photocopy was named Chester.
Yeah, I will say, on the first time that I heard about the Eureka card, before I had deep dove into other suspects other than Arthur Lee Allen, when I was straight out of the, I saw the Fincher movie, I was sold on Allen, all this stuff, and I heard about the card. The first thing that I thought was like the United States President Chester Allen Arthur, and then you take the Chester out of it, and then you got Allen Arthur, like how Arthur Lee Allen would have his name on a government form.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's amazing how that happens. So he's in Turlock Den. So his son's killed in a horrific accident. And then that reminds me of so Blanda was his second wife that they hit a deer or something in the road. Just another one of these horrific. Talk about that a little.
Oh yeah, so his first wife, Yolanda, Blandina is his third wife. Easy to get mixed up.
Oh, okay.
His first wife,
Yolanda.
So actually, I found out through researching this more that sometime they got married in 1958, but I can't find exactly when. But it was probably before July, because July would have been the conception date of their daughter. And then she was born in January of 1960. And then at that time, they lived in Reno, Nevada. So they got married in Reno.
Oh, Reno tie.
They lived in Reno. Actually, Klingel was an election worker in Reno as well. So I'm also able to find out what precinct rather they lived in Reno. It was called 411 at the time, and now I think it's called 1330, precinct 1330.
More threes.
Right. But what's interesting is by January, so in November, that means November 8th of 1960, Klingel was still living in Reno. That was when the election was. And then by January 7th, when this crash happens, they're living in Stockton.
Oh, okay.
So it's almost like now Klingel's family is deeply involved in Republican politics, which is another thing. But they're part of the American Legion. His mother is deeply involved with the Daughters of the American Revolution, the VFW. They're involved in the Freemasons, and just like
then we'll get into conspiracies.
And then,
was Chet a Freemason?
Oh yeah. So in 1948, when he would have been 21, he was sent on a mission by the Freemasons to observe a high school I think it was called Muir High School, Muir. And he was supposed to observe all the functions and try to recruit new people. And I found that's when I found out.
That's interesting.
That's when I found out he was connected to the Mason Lodge. And then I found out his father was a member all the way up to his death in 1958. And I believe his mother was as well. So I can only imagine that he was. But they were also involved in the Episcopal Church as well. But what's funny about that is he's a poll worker. He moves to Nevada in 1959. He's a poll worker. And then his mother's rooting for Nixon. Nixon loses Nevada in the election, and then he moves to California, a state that Nixon won. So I'm like, maybe it's like, just get out of here, But he moves back to Stockton, and then he's living there with his wife when the crash happens, and it seems
So
like they're
that's Yolanda. So when the crash was Yolanda?
Yeah, so it was almost exactly his daughter's first birthday. So his daughter was in the car, his wife was in the car,
I
and
didn't know that.
he was driving, and oddly, they're on their, it seems like if you figure out what part of the road they're on, they're like on their way from Reno to Stockton. So his mom still lived in Reno.
Mm-hmm.
So they may have been visiting his mother, or they're on their way back. It's also like, so his wife's birthday was Christmas. And so it's like in between his wife's birthday and his daughter's birthday. And they go and they see his mother maybe for New Year's, because it's January 7th. And they're on their way back, and a horse jumps a fence and goes on the highway. And then they crash into the horse.
It's
And
random.
so the horse goes through the windshield and collides with his wife, Yolanda. She's killed instantly. And his daughter, Sandra, is injured severely.
Oh my God.
And he's sent to the hospital as well. But his daughter lives, and he lives.
What year was the crash?
So that would have been January 7th of 1961.
Okay.
And so then he meets, or he starts dating this girl who is one of the best friends of, I found out from his brother's wedding, that this girl is one of the best friends of his brother's wife.
Oh.
And her name is Cecilia.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So her name was Cecilia Violet Jordan. And also another interesting thing about his brother's wedding is they were married on October 11th of 1950.
Yeah,
But
that's another coincidence.
But so then he marries Cecilia almost like, this is just a couple of months after his first wife died. And they get married on September 23rd of 1961. And then they have Chester III in July of 1962. So it's like a pretty quick turnaround of,
very quick.
He's already remarried. He has another kid. It's Chet III. You got to get more Chets, you know. So then in short order, he is divorced from his second wife. So they are married in 1961, and then they get divorced in 1964 in April. And so his obituary doesn't even mention his second wife's name. It just says his second marriage was short, but his third marriage, you know, it just moves right past it. But so they were married for a couple years, and the reason for the divorce was cruelty.
Oh, really?
And back then there was no fault divorce in the state of California. So you had to like pretty much prove, if you wanted to get divorced from somebody, that there was some wrongdoing.
So she cited that, I assume.
Yeah, so she said cruelty. It was abuse.
That's interesting. Wow, what a great find.
And so they get divorced in April of 64. And then he moves back in with his mom. And then in November, actually it was Thanksgiving. I don't remember the exact day because it's different every year, but it was Thanksgiving of 64. And it was the first Thanksgiving basically after the divorce. And Klingel swerved in front of another car. And he got in a crash, and he was severely injured, and his car was like totaled.
And he was by himself?
Yeah. So he said that he saw a flare.
This is crazy. This is nuts.
So I don't know if he was like depressed and he was thinking he was going to go swerve in front of a car or whatever.
Could have been.
But
after everything, all that's happened, I mean, his son killed. Oh, that comes later. But the wife being killed by the horse, and the daughter got injured.
Yeah. So, but then he gets remarried very shortly after this to a woman who had just immigrated to the United States from Iraq, and her name is Blandina.
That's Blandina Sarkis, right?
Yeah. And also, I noticed all three of his wives, he had stepchildren, so he married single mothers every time. Two of which were foreign-born women, but his second wife was American, and she divorced him. So I don't know, but he went back to marrying foreign-born women.
That's interesting how quickly he does it and how many times. So, yeah. So, man, this guy's interesting any way you slice it. You know, Zodiac or not, if he faked it or not, he's interesting. I mean, what's going on with him? So when did he have the walnut drying business? Is that what it was? Where they had the report of him and he's on his tractor? What year was that?
So in 1973, according to him, this is what we talked about this before the interview a little bit, but in his interview in 1980 that you were just mentioning, he says that he requested to be moved to the Fresno office of Fireman Fund Insurance, and that they said okay. And so he claimed in 1973 that he moved to Turlock ahead of time.
Oh yeah, talk about that. Yeah, definitely want to talk about that timeline.
Oh yeah, so I was able to find out through newspapers.com that he actually, his house that he had been living in before wasn't even on the market until March of 74, and he didn't sell it until months later, and that the house that he ended up moving into was still on the market even months after that. And the first time that I'm able to place him as having moved is September 21st of 1974. So
he lied where, he was not there.
Right. He was either mistaken. Of course, he could be exaggerating to make the story of his company promising to move him to the Fresno office and then delaying it more egregious. Like, say that he was stuck there for 4 years instead of 3. But basically, he moves ahead of time because he's been promised this to be transferred. And then he commutes to San Francisco, continues commuting for years. And then in 1976, when his mom dies in August of 76, then he quits his job with the insurance company. And he had been doing over almost a 2-hour commute both ways.
Wow.
And he quits the insurance company, and then he sells his daughter's estate, and he sells a property that he used to own in a place called Ceres, California, for $37,000. And he takes this money and then he puts it towards getting this nut farm in, and so he starts a nut farm in Houston, and that's at this East Keys Road location. This is not the first time he tried to farm.
Mm-hmm.
There's this story about how he both worked at, and I was able to, or say Crisscross was very helpful in substantiating this, that Klingel, both while working at North American Aviation, he also, which is in Los Angeles, he also had a farm in the desert, which is interesting choice. But he had a farm in the Amargosa Desert in Nevada, Death Valley. And
so what was he trying to grow in the desert or anything, or just?
If you go, and
cactus?
I was able to take the property records that Crisscross was able to find, which was very helpful. And it also says this is such an obscure location where this farm in the desert was, that its only address, it doesn't have an address, it's only defined by its position along the Mount Diablo meridian. So I thought,
there's another reference to Mount Diablo.
That sets some light bulbs off in my head. But
oh yeah,
if you go there to the coordinates that you can find from this legalese, and I tried to put it into this like surveyor translator thing that's for people who are like not real estate nerds, but they want to figure out what this thing's talking about, to translate it into coordinates. And so I took its position along these two meridians and translated it into coordinates. And then I went to those on Google Earth. And if you look at it, it's like complete desert. And then there's these circles of grass that are like acres huge. And so somebody went out and they created these artificial farms, basically. So that's what Klingel had bought up. And he said he would work at North American Aviation during the week. And then on the weekend, he would go and he would take his stuff, drive out to Nevada, and then he would farm all weekend and then drive back for his job. So he was staying with his dad in Anaheim, and then he would go stay on his farm.
He's a strange guy. He's a strange dude.
And farming was his passion. Farming was his dream, but he ended up being an insurance investigator for most of his life. So first he was an insurance adjuster like his father. His father was a lot of things. His father was a veteran of the Spanish-American War and another war. I can't remember exactly which one. I think it was World War I. And he was also in the Secret Service. And he was, back then, they were mostly dealing with bootleggers. And there's all these stories about Chester Klingel Sr. going and getting in bloody gunfights with these ruffians that are, causing trouble in Montana where he used to live. That's another thing. His dad grew up in Montana. But there's this one story, and I'm trying to remember the exact year, but I remember the date for obvious reasons because it was December 20th. I think it was December 20th of 1912. And his father was stabbed by a guy who had committed a robbery and was fleeing the scene. And then he stabbed him. But all this to say, his father was in the newspapers all the time in Montana and California. He was
interesting guy in his own right.
Sort of this well-known like war hero. There's an article in the Vallejo Times-Herald about Chester Klingel Sr. giving a speech at a veterans bar in Vallejo in 1950. And he was like the head of a Spanish-American War Veteran Association. And he had enough clout that candidates for local offices would publicly announce that they'd been endorsed by Chester Klingel Sr.
Was a good endorsement.
I can imagine Chester Klingel being Chester Klingel Jr. You kind of have some big shoes to fill. And then he ends up being the last of his siblings, sort of the least notable of his siblings. If you look up his siblings in the newspapers, there's articles about them left and right.
How many did he have?
He had a brother and two sisters, but one of his sisters died when she was like 1 year old.
Ooh.
But he had a sister named Charlotte, who was this big time actress. She married a well-known businessman in New York and ran off to go do Broadway shows. And her name was Charlotte Sacco. And on Broadway, she was well-known at the time. And there was all these articles in the Alamedan Times and like the Gazette and everything talking about Charlotte Sacco, who is like the pride of Alameda. Like she's an Alamedan who's gone off to New York.
It made good.
Yeah. And then his brother, Sherwood, he owned a bar. He had also been an insurance adjuster for a long time, but then he started his own bar called the Blue Book in Oakland. And so his brother lived in Oakland, had a bar there. He would get like, people would go and ask Sherwood his opinion on stuff. And so like in the newspapers, it'd be like, they're thinking about bringing back the draft. What does Sherwood think about this? And then there's like an interview with him talking about like the ups and downs of having a draft and selective service. And there's this everybody that's in the bar scene talking about, like, you know, Sherwood came in here the other day, like, to boost their cred or whatever. And
He had a name
Chester
for himself
Klingel,
as well. So yeah, Chet had some pressure.
and yet Chester Klingel, the only times that he seems to be in the paper is when one of his wives dies, or he gets divorced, or he got in a car accident, or like something negative has happened in his life. So I can imagine, to get a little bit psychoanalyze this guy, that if he is Zodiac, why he would crave media attention, why he would
Yeah,
feel
kind
this
of
jealousy towards
could have been
uh
some motivation.
yeah, and his he was the last of his siblings to get married.
Yeah, talk
And
about that when you were telling me earlier before we came on about the high school and the girls.
oh yeah, so there was these stories, and it would say like high school news, and then it goes to this section called people you know, and it sort of reminds me of the articles that somebody drudged up about Rick Marshall, when they used to joke around about Rick Marshall being like, oh, you know, Joe Dickey met the girl of his dreams, of course she's only in his dreams, and like stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's sort of the same jokes about Klingel, except they also tie in the fact that he was obsessed with guns. So
Right, the gun.
so uh the month after the Pearl Harbor attacks, he joins in January of, I want to say January of, when did the, I want to say 42, January of 42, he joins ROTC Rifle Club at his high school, and he got second and third place in rifle shooting contests. And at the same time, also he is going in homing pigeon races, and he's winning. He won a pigeon race, but that's just a little bit of him being an eccentric guy. But they said that he raised homing pigeons on the roof of the asylum and stuff like that, was the exaggerations people used to say on the thread. But he was technically in an asylum, but it was for tuberculosis, but I can get into that more
Mm-hmm.
later. But
Yeah, it wasn't
he
that he was
wasn't like, yeah, it wasn't
totally
that he was
insane. It was
insane.
more a rehabilitation thing, and not a people like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something. People envision.
Right. But there was this one that said people you know in the high school section, and it said Chester Klingel is in love ... with a beautiful 22 rifle that he purchased recently.
Yeah,
And
which is interesting because we had no Zodiac, like Herman Road, 22 long.
yeah, so another thing is he did better in rifle shooting than pistol shooting. So he was a marksman with a rifle and not as good with a pistol. And I can't think of why that is. I do know that we talked a little bit earlier about how he had what the news described as a shattered pinky finger, but I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But
So he had that his whole life, like they smashed it and it couldn't heal, or
possibly. I know that there's these all of these articles, and they used to report anytime that anybody went to the hospital in the town that he grew up in. And one of the times it was because a bunch of kids jumped him, and they beat him up, and they cracked two of his ribs, and they bruised him all over his face and his body.
wow,
And then
this guy's had a tough life.
They were talking about how a bunch of people, like everybody was saying, oh yeah, Chet got jumped, like all these kids beat him up, they were bullying him. And then he was interviewed by the paper, and he said, no, I just fell. Nobody hit me, I just fell. And
Yeah.
they weren't buying it. But
Mm-hmm.
there was another time he had a broken arm. He said that he fell. Just a lot of time. He seems to just kind of fall over and get extreme injuries a lot, you know? Like, it's kind of like if you're a school counselor, then you tend to ask if there's something else going on. But they covered his childhood extensively because his family was pretty high profile, and they used
Because of
to,
his dad.
yeah, his dad and his mom, because his mom was actually a founding member of the Republican Women of America. and it was like some sort of name like that, but it was like definitely a club for Republican women. She's also the head of the Adelphian Society, which is like a whole musical theater thing, and she was part of
That's interesting.
and she's also had a sewing club at her house, and they would meet monthly and they would sew, like, I forget exactly what it's called because I had to Google it because it sounded sort of nefarious. It was like the Altarian
The sewing,
Guild, the
yeah,
Altars
but it
Guild
was
or something.
it was a sewing club then.
And so it was a sewing club, but it was specifically for like traditional garb. And so I don't know if that had to do with the Freemasons that they were involved with, or if that was just about the Episcopal Church. But they had a sewing club, but it was like for church stuff. And then she had a Bible club that met at their house every week. And she used to throw lavish parties, and there'd be games, and then they would talk about how she came out in a ridiculous costume and she was singing, and they called her Mademoiselle Klingel. And so there's these pictures, and I remember on the forum in 2017 when Klingel died, and then it was revealed that he was Sam, the suspect referred to as Sam from Eureka. That people started looking at pictures of Chester Klingel, and then they found pictures of Mrs. Chester Klingel, which is his mom. And then they were like, is this Chester in drag? Because it's like this extreme costume. She has extreme makeup on. But it's really because mom. Yeah,
I think I've seen that. Now, maybe I've seen that on the forum before. I think maybe I did. I remember, now that rings a bell.
Yeah, that if you try to find a picture of Chester Klingel, you're much more likely to find a picture of Mrs. Chester Klingel than you are of him.
Yeah, because back then they would always call you by your husband's name, like Mrs.
Right.
Chester. Yeah, instead of her name.
I found one letter to the editor that was written by her, and she didn't sign it Mrs. Chester Klingel. She signed it as Marjorie Stewart. And
wow.
But her name is Alice Marjorie Stewart Klingel. So she got a little bit political and a little bit controversial in her letter to the editor. So maybe she wanted to obscure her identity for a little bit, but she still left her address. So that's the way I was able to find it, is because I was just looking up the address, because I found out over time there is so many different egregious ways to misspell Klingel, you would not believe it.
I bet. Yeah. Just phonetically or however they got lazy and just did it however they thought would.
So I've seen like Klingel, I've seen Klunkel, I've seen Klingel, but the E and the L are mixed up. It's probably the most common one. And then one time
you search them all.
So yeah, I kind of did this fuzzy search where I tried to think how, if I were, because I have sort of a unique last name, so I have this experience of when you're in the paper, they misspell your last name, and so I'm kind of used to it. But so I thought, if you're a newspaper reporter and you're gonna mess this guy's name up, how would you do it? And then I tried to do those, and it was kind of funny, because then when I would think of one that was like more terrible, like more worse misspelling, then it would actually yield more results that were actually him, because it was almost like anytime he got his name in the paper, it wasn't rightly his name.
Yeah.
And
you're searching exact, so
this one I found was 1210, because they lived on 1210 Grand Street in Alameda. So I thought, well, shortcut to not have to do this sort of fuzzy search is I just search 1210 Grand Street. I go to the Alameda papers and around there, and then I just put the dates, the start date and end date, as their move in and move out date. And anything that pops up should hypothetically be one of the Klingels. So that's how I found,
because they were there for a long time.
Yeah, so that's how I found the letter from Marjorie Stewart, which is definitely from her, where she came out saying that she came out against fraternities, and she thought that fraternities and sororities were perverting the children and making them violent and making them do drugs and all this stuff.
Man, he's got quite a family. And then what he had, but did you find anything else that was more how you would envision the Zodiac to have been. Anything in his background, of course, 22. He's a shooter.
Oh yeah. So just
Anything
zeroing
else
in,
that's
because I know
kind of
so
like
much
what you
about this
already
guy,
thought
it's
about
easy to get lost
Zodiac
in the
before you
periphery.
looked into Chet?
Oh yeah, so it's easy to get lost in the periphery of stuff because I know so much about him specifically. Now I got to remember we're relating everything back to Zodiac. So, he's so basically he grew up just blocks away from Presidio Heights, on 115 2nd Street, San Francisco. If anybody wants to look up how close it is, and at the time he worked 3333 California Street, San Francisco, which is equally as close. He was stationed at the Presidio Army base. He went, and there's people who talk about a potential connection to Texas in the Zodiac case. He was trained in Texas in the Army. He was stationed at the Presidio doing radar repair. I don't buy into most of the stuff the case breaker said. They did say some interesting things about potential connections between being a radar technician and being the Zodiac killer. He was unlucky with women. He was a gun nut. He drove around a lot, which I think is important because the Zodiac's
Yeah, he's
crimes
definitely
cover
a
this
driver.
wide area. And then you sort of find out the more unconfirmed things you start including, the more interesting it is, which tends to be the case. But just to get into them a little bit, so while he lived at, this is the only time in my life that I can't remember that 366 Marin Ave, Mill Valley was his address. And then he would go and visit his wife's family in Turlock all the time, which is why he ended up, I think like that's probably the real reason why he ended up moving to Turlock and commuting to work, because he might have thought it's easier to just live there so that we can live right by her family, and then I commute to work versus I have a short commute to work, but then I have to go drive out to the middle of nowhere to see her family. Kind of shows you which one happens more often, I guess. And then, but the route from 366 Marin Ave, Mill Valley to his wife's family in Turlock, it cuts right through Pleasanton, and it also cuts right through the exact highway that Kathleen Johns reports being abducted on in Modesto.
Right. I think Richard's written about that before quite a bit.
Yeah.
How Chester ties into that road where Kathleen, like you're talking about with Kathleen Johns' abduction, right? That whole area.
And then if you start to factor in things like Donna Lass, then he used to drive out to Nevada to go to Yosemite all the time over by Nevada. And then he used to live in Reno, and he used to go visit his mom there. He's familiar with, he's a fisherman, so he could know Lake Berryessa. Also, when he was
I was going to ask you if you found any ties other, obviously Presidio, he knows backward and forward, but if he had anything, maybe Vallejo, Benicia, Berryessa.
As far as Vallejo, I know that his father was a well-regarded person there, but other than that, I don't see any confirmable direct tie to Vallejo, other than there's this property on Dwight Way in Vallejo that at some point it was owned by his son Schubert. And
I recall something about that now.
Yeah, so it was, but I cannot verify what time Schubert would have owned this property. But if you look at Schubert's address history, that's almost like, oh wow, every single one of these towns, there's something that like Richard Grinnell would go crazy if he saw this address history.
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah. Oh, I love it. He'll dig into that. All you guys, that's great.
Talking about Pleasant Hill, you're talking about like Mount Diablo University, and you're talking about Napa because he lived on Armour Drive up there, and then lived in Vallejo, lived in like all these different areas. But I think it's interesting because he still to this day is a math professor at Mount Diablo College.
That's interesting.
And so That was also, I think that town is also where some unconfirmed Zodiac attacks that are in the Yellow Book happened. Pleasant, whatever it's called. I'll have to double check the town name there because I don't want to mess it up.
So yeah, there's on his face, he's not bad. I mean, unfortunately we only that one photo of Chet, which the one I'm showing now, where of course I filled in his glasses, but it's kind of whited out, but he's not that older picture. I had that up. I don't know where that comes from, maybe high school or something.
Oh yeah, Walnut Creek. That's where it was. Walnut Creek and Pleasant Hill is the two places I was talking about where Schubert was.
Yeah, so he's all kind of in the general vicinity of the canonical Zodiac crime. So Chet's an interesting guy on his face for a lot of reasons. Crazy life. So I know that you talked about it when you were on Ned's show and everything like that. So there's let's go real quick. The possibilities of the whole thing with Chet in the card. It's either he hoaxed the card, or he's Zodiac, or Zodiac knew Chet and had access to the keys and wanted to frame him. Am I getting all those right?
Yeah, that's so pretty much the possibilities as I outlined them on Ned's show and as I see them is Chet Klingel was just let's say he like read Graysmith's book in 1986 and he starts reading it and he's like, oh, the Presidio, I know that place, and like, oh, I know this place, and like, hey, my handwriting kind of looks like that, and I was 43 in 1969 and I was working right over there, and just sort of sees these commonalities, and then he's like, what if I just messed with the cops for some reason and I drove 5 hours from my house to go drop off this card, and I'll include a copy of these post office keys, and they're mine, and then they'll trace it back to me, and I won't write Zodiac on it anywhere at all.
So they can't prove it was me anyway. So he knows even if they found him, which is, I'm glad you said that, because it's like, why would he risk it? If he's Zodiac, why would he risk it?
Right. And then that goes back to the other point, because you can say if he's a hoaxer, that he leaves Zodiac off of it so that he doesn't get charged with wasting police time. He could claim it meant something else. It was just some silly joke. If he's Zodiac, he leaves Zodiac off of it for plausible deniability reasons in case it gets traced back to him. But I know that Tom Voigt talked about Chester Klingel being in poor health at that time. He was 65 years old
when the card was mailed.
Yeah.
In 90.
And so he was 64 going on 65. And allegedly he was in poor health. I could see a scenario where he's like, you know what, I'm on my deathbed or whatever, or like, I'm just really sick, I'm getting up there. Everybody thinks that it's Robert Hall Star right now.
Yeah.
Like,
if he was Zodiac, that would have bothered him.
Maybe it did bother him. Maybe it made him think. And plus, there's all this attention on the New York Zodiac in 1990. Like, so maybe he's jealous of the attention. Like, there's all this new attention on the case from Graysmith's book, but it's not in the right place. Nobody's looking at him at all. Like, the picture of who the Zodiac is when he gets home is completely wrong. If Klingel is the Zodiac, then he reads Graysmith's book and he sees, basically they're saying, oh yeah, Zodiac got home to go live in his mother's basement by himself. And he was like this big, boastful guy who's just going around telling everybody his plans and all this stuff. And then maybe if he's Zodiac, he's reading that and he's like, as a matter of fact, I get home to my wife and children, and then I completely keep this a secret from them. Nobody knows anything. I'm not going around bragging about this stuff. I'm not a 6 foot tall, 250 pound bald pedophile. Like, I want to.
Yeah, I've always said that. Yeah, like whoever Zodiac is would be like, why are they? This guy at 32 Fresno is not me. Kind of like when they They did, they solved the 340 where he said, "I'm not the caller to that TV show." It'd be the same thing, I'm not him.
Right, but it's like if Chet Klingel is the Zodiac from the same sort of like attack this from a different angle. If Chet Klingel is the Zodiac, then by 1986 he kind of has his life together. Like his dream of having a farm. Apparently in 76 there was some divorce proceedings with his third wife, and then they must not have come to the conclusion. Like they must have stopped at some point, and she decided to stay with him. So you can kind of line this up as Blandina is thinking of leaving him. She starts divorce proceedings, as we found documentation of. And then he quits his job at the insurance firm, so he's not commuting far away from home anymore. He buys this farm, and he brings his wife in on it as a business partner. Like they start a farm together. He finally has this farm that he's always dreamed of. Then ironically, this lines up pretty well actually now that I'm thinking about it, because I only just learned about the Agra Earth Station's business at all. But I mean, he's a pretty well-regarded guy in January of 86. He is the guy that you go to if you want TV in your house in town. Like everybody would have to go to him and Daryl Gordon Ryan if they wanted TV in their house in Turtle Rock. So in 1986, he's kind of riding high a little bit. He's like a well-regarded businessman. He's known throughout town. Finally, he has a profile in the Modesto Bee, and he's just kind of got his life together. He's got his family back with him. So maybe his motivations for why he was Zodiac in the first place are like no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes it so that he doesn't want to, at least in 1986, he doesn't want to just throw all of that away and risk it by getting back into the Zodiac stuff. And then maybe in 1990, his wife was in very poor health. He was in very poor health. His son was dead. So he sort of has, maybe he has the idea of, I just want to taunt him again. I just want to like get this, just sort of send them this clue, and maybe they won't even pick up on it. Maybe they'll be so clueless that like,
yeah, kind of like, sort of like Dennis Rader did with BTK, where he kind of took a victory lap on an anniversary, and of course it wound up to his undoing and got caught from it, but it was more of a nostalgia play.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, and then that could also be more pointedly because of the attention on the New York Zodiac. He also kind of wants people to know, this guy in New York is not me. Like, I did not move to New York and go start shooting people that were sleeping on park benches with zip guns.
Yeah.
So maybe that could be part of the motivation as well. It could be, I know that a lot of people think this could be Zodiac framing Klingel. Mm-hmm. I kind of noticed that you can't really read the postmark on the envelope. But if you get down into the nitty-gritty of it, and then I went and I got a little bit obsessive, which I tend to do, and I got to find some postmarks from Eureka for comparison, and I got into the font, and then I started discussing this with some people who were trying to help me out figure out what date this could be. And it seems like it is either December 8th or December 18th.
Oh, yeah. Because it is faded out down there. You can see the Eureka easily, but not that little bit above the date.
Yeah, so of course it seems like the last number is an 8. So I'm guessing if it's before Christmas, then it's either the 8th or it's the 18th. And the 18th jumps out at me, obviously, for obvious reasons, because that is Arthur Lee Allen's birthday, but it's also Paul Stein's birthday.
Right, December 18th. That would have been an interesting tie-in. Yeah, that's Stein's birthday and Arthur Lee Allen's would have been a neat little coincidence.
makes me wonder, I'd have to double check, but did the Graysmith book mention what day the suspect Robert Hallstar's birthday was?
I don't know.
Because
That's a good question. Not sure.
I know that he
It's been a while
mentions
since
the
I've read it,
call,
but yeah, that'd be interesting if he did. Like if that would have
the
been
call
public
to
knowledge or not.
Belai's house, and the call to Belai's house, which some documentation suggests was actually January 10th, but the call to Belai's house that was saying, "It's my birthday. I'm the Zodiac. It's my birthday."
Yeah.
And that Graysmith claims that that was on Robert Hallstar's birthday. Obviously, Robert Hallstar is Arthur Lee Allen. For I'm sure people who are listening know that, but
Yeah.
just to
The pseudonym that was used in the book.
And so Robert Hallstar, if it was known that his birthday was December 18th, could that then motivate Klingel, if he is Zodiac, to add a little bit of fuel to the fire and send this December 18th? But he doesn't want to send it in Turlock because that would draw too much attention there. So maybe when
Yeah.
he's
So
on
he
a
sends
trip
it.
that he already has an
So
excuse to see his daughter around Christmas time, and he sends it while he's up there, I could see that happening. I will say the one possibility that used to be considered that I think now is patently ridiculous is that Zodiac just found some keys on the ground and he picked them up and he threw them in the card for no reason. Like he didn't know who the owner of the keys were.
yeah, he
And
either knew him or not.
yeah, like I don't think that Zodiac just happened to find these keys and it just happened to go back to a 5'11", 43-year-old guy living in Mill Valley, working in Presidio Heights in 1969, who was white and had blonde
Yeah.
hair and glasses and was had all these connections to the Presidio and like this proficiency with shooting and ties to the Army and the Navy and stuff. Like just that being a coincidence, especially with the handwriting, like because if Klingel sent this card, then he was not copying Zodiac's handwriting. This is just him writing in his own handwriting. And yet it happens to match so closely because his handwriting by itself, if you go back to his military documents, his Merchant Marine documents, if you take the Merchant Marine document and then his Social Security document and then the Zodiac letters and then this, it almost looks like each of them is his handwriting progressing over time. Like you can see how his handwriting changes just in the 3 years between the Merchant Marine document and the Social Security application. He's already changed his way of writing the letter A on his military application by the time he's 18 to be like Zodiac's. He has the check mark R, he has the looped and the straight D's exactly like Zodiac. He draws his M's the same. He does, like, I have a whole I should have sent it to you in retrospect, but I have this whole thing of his handwriting and the letter G with just the straight down where it's not like it doesn't loop around like most people's lowercase g. Um, Again, the check mark R's, the W's with the rounded bottoms that stick out on the right side. Um, his letter F is like a candy cane. His capital F is with 3 strokes, which is kind of a unique way of writing capital F, and Zodiac does the same thing. His way of writing the uppercase B, and which is a very common way of writing an uppercase B, but he does also do that the same way. And like as you're going through it, and then his way of writing the letter N as well, where sometimes it almost looks like a 17, and the same with the H's, but then sometimes it's more rounded. But I'm just like verbally describing it. I should have sent you these images for handwriting comparison
Yeah.
purposes.
I've seen some of them before. I've seen some of it. It's
Yeah.
not bad. It's better than a lot. For
And so it's almost like if he changed his handwriting on this envelope, it was to make it less Zodiac like, because the R on here looks less like a Zodiac R than the R's on Klingel's known writing. And like there's other examples on there, but it's like he could have so easily done some slight modifications to his writing to make it look exactly like Zodiac if that's what he was going for, but he didn't do it. So I know that like Grinnell makes this point, and I think that sometimes I respect Grinnell's research capabilities immensely. Sometimes I disagree with how far he takes this point, but I remember at one point Grinnell said you could almost argue that an envelope with handwriting that looks less like Zodiac's is more likely to be from Zodiac than one that has identical handwriting.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, once you, yeah, I could see that.
I think that in this case, with how minor the differences are, that fits this situation. That it's been 26 years, and he just writes his R a little bit different. He just writes his 9 a little bit different. His S's look a little bit more like lightning bolts, you know, like it's just minor changes that happen with age. And it's not like you're trying to make your writing look exactly like Zodiac's did 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, it would change. I mean, it's you know, he's an interesting dark horse suspect for sure. I mean, when you look at him, he's, you know, he's got enough there that would keep you trained over him. So you've done a lot. I mean, you've done some impressive stuff to really, you know, dig into it, you know, and learning about, you know, a lot. It's hard, you know, and you're going back in time like that and digging up everything, learning new ways to find more stuff on a guy that existed pre-internet. And, you know,
I will say newspapers.com,
good
the
stuff.
new back things they had, it has so much stuff. It's been such a help. And you were able to get a People's Report that was very helpful. Somebody got
I hope you could use that. Yeah, an attorney friend of mine gets that. So I thought, you know, because I was interested enough in him to do a little of my own digging. Because you know, he's a worthy subject of study.
Yeah, it was like seemed to me like the surprise if Klingel had been identified, like if Klingel was Zodiac and he had been identified as Zodiac, would be similar to when people found out that Dennis Rader was the BTK killer.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up earlier. It really reminds me of that, you know, and this is just Zodiac enough that you have to know Zodiac to see why this would hit you as a Zodiac correspondence. And I guess it was something that if it was never found at the newspaper, you know, he was just okay with that, you know, like, okay, I just sent it in and someone finds it, great. If not, you know, I tried. You know, he wasn't.
I think that it's just because he has that little bit of a streak in him where he's getting a kick out of knowing. And if this card is, if Klingel was Zodiac and he sent this, I would expect that there's probably a whole bunch more cards out there that were sent to the San Francisco Chronicle and maybe a few other newspapers.
Yeah, that we never heard about.
That were like subtle hints, sort of like, I know something you don't know. And like he's just kind of getting a kick out of it. Like he's sitting at home being like, man, they have absolutely no idea who I am. You could look at the most extensive suspect list and Chester Clark Klingel is nowhere on there as of 1990. And like he would just be thinking the cops have absolutely no idea. They never spoken to me. They never interviewed me. Like there was no inkling of anything. There was even a potential Zodiac attack. At the time, it was considered a potential Zodiac attack just a block and a half away from Chester Clark Klingel's house, where a woman named Isabel Watson was hit by a car. And now it seems like the killer was, or not the killer, but the attacker rather, was identified as a guy named William Marion Lawson, who got picked up for an unrelated, or like at the time they thought unrelated, similar attack. And that there's documents that show that he confessed to the Isabel Watson attack. He had a knife that matched the description, and that he had just broken out of prison right before the Isabel Watson attack and stolen a car and like all this stuff. But at the time, Ken Narlow was saying, I am pretty sure that this was a Zodiac attack, and it happened just blocks away from Klingel's house in 1972, on April 7th of 1972.
And what was the victim's name? I want to remember so I can look it up.
Isabel Watson. That's
Watson. That's right. I remember
ISO.
something about Isabel Watson. Okay.
Yeah, but now it seems like that was an unrelated attack. It was not Zodiac. It was some
Yeah, that's the one
guy who
they
broke
figured
out of
out.
prison. But at least on the Tapatalk thread, they have documents that show this guy Lawson confessed to it, and somebody has Lawson as their Zodiac Killer suspect because he says that he has a way to make the name fit with the Z13, but it seems like Lawson was in prison for all known Zodiac activity, so I don't think that's very
Yeah,
likely.
that would be tough. So
It would be
do you
tough.
know what happened to the card itself, the Eureka card? Did they give it to SFPD? I hope they didn't. It'd be even better hands with anybody but them. But
I think the most recent update that I've seen on it was there was a handwriting expert from San Francisco PD who said that he didn't think it was Zodiac because it was overwritten and that he thought that it was Trace. But you can go and look at as many Zodiac envelopes as you want and try to line it up, and it's not traced off of any material that we know of at all. So
I wonder if they could get DNA off of this stamp since it's not as old as
I was able to find out
card. It's a 1990. It's not as old, but maybe if it wasn't taken home like a lot of the original correspondence was that SFPD had, maybe there was a better chance of not being totally contaminated and getting something off the back of the stamp. At least, see if it came back to Klingel or.
Little to no chance that you'd get DNA off of that stamp because it's actually a sticker stamp. Like it has a back of it.
Is that you looked up and that particular Christmas tree was just stick on?
Yeah, so it's an American greetings, like it comes with the cards.
That's kind of interesting in itself that it used a stick on, but
so you take it and then you just sort of stick it on there. Like it is a self-adhesive stamp. And I know that nowadays most envelopes are self-adhesive as well. Like you can just sort of wet them down with sponge, whatever, like you just close it up. I have sent letters a lot and I've never licked an envelope in the modern day, but I don't know if there would be DNA on there. If there is, I would be very surprised if they didn't already do something with it, but I don't know anything about that. Because a lot of this stuff with the Eureka card, it's all Department of Justice, it's all FBI, and you can't Freedom of Information Act request these investigative documents. Like, friend of mine, Gorilla Train, goes by Gorilla Train, has tried, and it's like, actually, nope, you can't use the Freedom of Information Act to find investigative materials from the FBI or the Department of Justice. And I was like, that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their investigation of Klingel is still open. It just means that those types of documents are not the types of documents that you're able to subpoena. Because I remember we were trying to find out what the process was that led them to get the warrant to search through Klingel's trash, and could not get it because
you've never seen any proof of documentation that they got the DNA from the trash, or there was any.
No, so there is documentation, and I even have it in my camera roll in its own folder of Klingel documents, and I can go ahead and check exactly what it says, but yeah, there's a case number there. They talk about the exact dates that they searched everything. It says the suspect, Klingel, Chester, offense 187, multiple. Let's see, has case number SF 2000. It's 0418932243 is the agency case number. So we use that to try to get it. Could not find it. They said they took 3 different partial DNA samples from. Okay, this is interesting. Envelope mailed to San Francisco Chronicle, postmarked July 31st, 1969. Envelope mailed to San Francisco Examiner, postmarked July 31st, 1969. Envelope mailed to Vallejo Times Herald, misspelled. It says sick. postmarked July 31st, 1969. So they took partial profiles from stamps on all three of those letters. And then they made what they called a composite profile, as in we're assuming that each of these partial DNA profiles were different parts of the same complete DNA profile. And then they compared that to a clear plastic tube containing several chewed pieces of gum, 3 dirty Q-tips, a Kleenex, a letter that says from Chester Klingel that it said was not examined. That's interesting. And then empty tubes of eye medication that were also not examined. And then a disposable coffee cup with a lid and a straw. So
wow.
They took DNA from the chewing gum, the Q-tips, a Kleenex, and a coffee cup, and they compared it to DNA from the first 3 letters. And then it was found that none of the DNA profiles matched each other.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you about the whole thing, getting back into the forensics, kind of in general too, but to tie into anything, because it was what, as we know, the best DNA sample they got was when they attempted or did PCR test the 78 letter, which is, of course, not confirmed Zodiac, the I am back with you letter. And that's the one that they ruled out Arthur Lee Allen on. They tested Arthur Lee Allen's brain tissue DNA against that. Of course, it was negative. But like Druser was saying, that it being only a partial, even in the 78 letter that they got, you cannot test it against another partial, let's say against the Exorcist letter or anything pre-Exorcist, with it only being a partial. I think that's what he was telling me. Like, so there's no way of saying 100% that whoever wrote the 78 letter absolutely did Exorcist or any other Zodiac letter. Does that sound right?
Yeah, at least not DNA wise. There's still handwriting analysis and things of that nature. I think you can also read into Druser especially knows about the watermarks on the paper, the exact type of paper that was used. It seems like the police even deliberately obfuscated their knowledge about the types of paper that was used, just in case there was a very well-read hoaxer that was trying to mimic the type of paper that Zodiac was using. Of course, now with our HD scans, Druser's able to go in there and be like, hey, wait a minute. Now, it's actually the opposite of what Sherwood Morrill said. And I can't confirm that that was deliberate, but I think that it's kind of in the same vein as like when they said that Zodiac could have easily hit his targets at Lake Herman Road because there was a full moon when they knew that there was a new moon. Because that was sort of their way, especially because the guy names himself Zodiac. Like he might be interested in moon phases. That might play into this a little. To try to bait him to give more information. Now I'm trying to think whether he had named himself Zodiac or not, but he had used some astrological symbols in his
cipher symbols.
So I think they were like, yeah, this might be connected to moon phases, and they went and tested out that theory. And then, of course, you can see the handwriting gets scratchier and bigger and more angry and does like a million exclamation marks and swears. And, he had even censored, higher up in the letter, he censors the word damn. He says, I hung up the phone and the DA star exclamation point upside down thing rang off the hook. Like he censored the word damn in a very cartoonish fashion.
That's interesting. It's kind of Michael Cole talks about that a little bit in his book series about how he won't say the F word because he's from that period of time where it's just really bad to say that even the F word. So I thought that was interesting.
I would say being raised in that kind of household, and this is kind of tapping into personal experience, but damn is the worst of the curse words in that kind of a household, because it's literally like if when my mother was, when we were growing up, and I would say damn it, she'd say bless it. You better bless it. Don't damn anything. It's terrible, because that's like
it's condemning. It's condemned.
Yeah, that's like a biblical thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of thought that's where I
That's
was like,
interesting.
and of course, Klingel is raised in a household where they have Bible study every week, and his parents are involved in garments for the church and, you know, stuff like that. So I thought it was interesting. Of course, I'm also kind of taking into account Klingel grew up during the Depression. I try to take into account like historical context with things that are happening, and sometimes it makes things make more sense. Like him joining the ROTC immediately after Pearl Harbor makes sense because it's like we've just been attacked and now you're motivated and you're like, man, F these guys. I'm going to go join the military and I'm going to fight them, you know? And so that makes sense. So it's like the stock market crash, and then after that their family starts bouncing between apartments in San Francisco, and I think they lived in like 5 different apartments in San Francisco during the Depression, and one of them was on Vallejo Street. Of course,
Wow,
I
that's
don't want
no
to
coincidence.
read too much into Vallejo Street because then it's like, you know, when you're like, oh yeah, what's the connection between Klingel and Vallejo? Then I'd be over here with a
It was
cork
on
board
Vallejo Street.
being like, he lived on Vallejo Street, so he's connected to Vallejo, and that's how it's, you know, it sounds crazy. But I do know that like when there is a street name that is named after a town, that it's normally because that town is like not too far from there, and it's a town that people normally end
Oh,
up going.
absolutely.
Um, so I don't think. Also, I know that they used to go on fishing trips all the time. I can imagine them going on the ferry, going up there. His dad being involved with the VFW and the American Legion and all these veterans groups. I could imagine him ending up in Vallejo for that reason because they had a veterans bar there. They had the Mare Island Naval Shipyard there. Klingel could have been
Oh yeah, the
introduced
merchant
to
marine.
Mare Island Naval Shipyard while he was a merchant marine and he was working on
Yep.
Navy ships. Even though I can't confirm that, but if I could find like a ship manifest somewhere for the Matthew P. Deedy Liberty ship, then maybe I could find out it was at Mare Island during that period of time. But I can't confirm that. But there's plenty of ways that he could have found out about Vallejo and about Lake Berryessa. I can only speculate, but I know that he had family family ties to a place called, I want to say, Woodland, California, and they had like a winter home up there, and they would go up there. That's over by Sacramento ish. And if you're there and you're trying to go fish, then it's pretty much you're either going to Folsom Lake or you're going to Lake Berryessa. So I don't know if he could have ended up going there. Of course, with his ties to Eureka later, I'm sure that he would have known that, but that was much later down the line. But I could definitely see him going to Lake Berryessa to fish. He seems to be someone who travels around a lot. He was driving hours to go see his wife's family, commuting hours.
He's
He
definitely a driver.
used to go commute from Los Angeles to Nevada, that was
Good
like
haul. 4 or 5
a
hour.
5-hour drive both ways. And he didn't commute there every day, but he did weekly, and he would stay half at his dad's house and half at the farm, and up until his father's death. And his father is buried at the Presidio National Cemetery, and he was a general at the Presidio Army Base as well. I don't know if he was his own son's general or if that was something that happened later, but I know that Klingel was stationed at the Presidio Army Base, and that his dad was the captain, not the general, the captain at the Presidio Army Base as well.
Yeah, you've done some great work on it. I mean, you've really taken all the existing stuff and really brought it further, than anyone could have. It's really amazing.
I also found another picture of Klingel. I don't know if you have it.
I just found that younger one, other than the one that was in the obit.
Yeah, did you find the one where he was on the basketball team and he was 20?
It looks like that might be this one.
No, that's actually his Merchant Marine ID photo.
Oh, so, that's the Merchant Marine. Okay. No, I haven't seen the basketball one.
He would have been 15 in that picture. So you can imagine how his face changes from 15 to 43.
Oh, I'm sure quite a bit.
But
What year was he born?
1926.
26. Okay, so he would have been a little bit older than some people try to peg Zodiac at Lake Herman Road, maybe late 30s, almost 40.
Yeah, at Presidio Heights, I know that it said mid 40s initially in the description. I can find the exact description, but that's probably the time when people most clearly saw his face. And they pegged him as being, oh yeah, so the Robbins kids. They said a white male adult in his early 40s, roughly 5'8", heavy build, reddish blonde crew cut hair, wearing eyeglasses, dark brown trousers, dark parka style jacket, and dark shoes. So he was 5'11". He was formerly blonde. He was blonde when he was 16. I don't know if he would have still been blonde when he was in his 40s, because I know that people's hair sometimes gets darker as they age. But he was described as blonde and having blue eyes and having a ruddy complexion when he was in the military. As far as being in his early 40s, you could say mid 40s when you're 43, I guess, but early 40s isn't too crazy. Donald Fouke said a white male adult, 35 to 45, roughly 5'10", 180, 200 pounds, medium heavy build, barrel chested, medium complexion, light colored hair, possibly graying in the rear, although it may have been a lighting effect. Crew cut, wearing eyeglasses, dressed in a dark blue, navy blue waist length zipper type jacket with elastic cuffs and elastic waistband, zipped part way up with brown wool pleated type rust brown slacks that were baggy in the rear, wearing low cut engineering boots. So I'm reading, that wasn't from my memory, by the way. But
yeah, I can generally remember a lot of them, but not per the.
And then
every word.
Of course, Fouke later changed his description in later years to be taller and balder, and I don't know if he was fitting with Alan. I don't know if there was some confusion going on. I will say that height descriptions get pretty subjective. I'm not ruling anybody out for being 6 feet tall, as some people would like to. I'm not ruling anybody out for even being 6'1", or 6'2", even pushing it a little bit. But the average height description is off by 1 to 3 inches and is an underestimate. I remember I read a whole study on this.
I get into heights a lot with Cooper, obviously, but more than Zodiac. Because Zodiac, I think anything is in play from like 5'8" to 6'1". Cecilia was at 5'11", 6 feet. Majot, you really got to throw away. He's sitting on the ground. He's got a flashlight in his face. His 5'8" is really useless. Unfortunately, Fouke's a little better because he was a cop, but he's still sitting in a car. It's just anything is in play there.
If you listen to the transcript, or rather you read the transcript of the interview with Majot, and you put that in the context of later interviews with him and the way that he talks, it even says in the transcript of the interview in the Vallejo police files at the day that it happened, that he was speaking in sentence fragments and they had to try to put them in the right order. He repeatedly said, "I couldn't tell. It was dark. I didn't see what he looked like."
Yeah, and they cut all that out.
They try to nail him down on like specific things. They were like, because they were just like hopeless because there's no other witnesses. So they were like, "Is there anything unique about him? Anything that stood out?" And he's like, "He has a big face." And they're like, "Okay, he has a big face." And then they said, "Was he?" And at first he said he was old. So then they said, how old is old? And he said, older than me, probably like 25, 28.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, well, that's very different than saying that he's old.
Yeah, because like, depending on your age, what does that mean? Yeah, if the old to
Yeah.
him was 25.
And then he goes, he was speaking in sentence fragments again, but he kept on emphasizing that it was dark. He couldn't see very well. And when they tried to nail him down on stuff, then when they asked him the height, that seems to be what I would probably say is the least sure of anything that he said.
Oh,
Because he said
I
maybe,
agree,
because he said
100%.
maybe 5'8", I don't know, is I think
Yeah,
the exact quote.
yeah, his shouldn't even be in the matrix for heights, in my opinion.
I mean, that sounds to me like somebody throwing a number out
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
And as far as his further description, he said he was wearing a blue shirt. He couldn't tell if it was short or long sleeve shirt. And he wasn't wearing glasses. Of course, later he said he was wearing glasses. He said he had blonde hair. Of course, later he said he had jet black hair. He
oh
said that
yeah,
he
he's all over. And then he picks Arthur Lee Allen out of a lineup. Oh yeah,
right. So
it looks nothing like what he described.
Arthur Lee Allen, who is infamously a well-built 6 foot tall
Well
guy with
built,
jet black full head of hair, wearing glasses, and also named
250
Richard.
probably at that time too.
Right. I remember somebody actually, I'm sure that you saw this. I'm sure somebody would have sent this to you, but did you see that article from like December of 1969 that was talking about
Yeah.
Arthur Lee Allen's weight loss journey?
Mm-hmm.
That was talking about how he had gone from 250 to 210, and it was saying that he was shooting for a goal of, I think it was that he had gone from, like, he was shooting for 210 and that he was like halfway there from 250, something like
Yeah.
that. And weight estimates are also infamously unreliable.
True.
Like, if I can find
Really hard.
if I can find the study on that, it's like they're off by like 25 to 40 pounds either direction typically. Like, it's just completely random how they get it wrong. And very rarely is it ever like correct. I mean, if I was to be confident in somebody's weight estimate, it would be Brian Hartnell's, because he literally went
Oh,
25.
absolutely.
Because he literally went 25 either way. It's like he knows that he could be wrong up.
Yeah, because he was
down.
sick. He was 6'7", so it was hard for him. He's always said like everything's down. Of course, I think Cecilia was, obviously she had been stabbed, but she's, trying to tell Deputy Dave Collins, who was standing there, and said his own height. How tall do you think he was? I'm 5'10". She said about 2 inches taller than you, 6 feet. Even though who knows what the slant was or whatever they're standing on there.
Right.
But, that's a daytime sighting in front. It's going to, people shouldn't downplay Cecilia's estimate after at least he's standing close to where the killer would have been and said, I'm 5'10". Where do you think? And she said about 2 inches taller than you.
Oh yeah. I think we should probably, my phone is dying.
No, we're good. I mean, we're kind of at the end anyway, but like I was saying, great job you've done on Chet and everything, everything on the case. So this is fantastic work. I like, I think, I'm going to ask you for some tips on, doing the newspaper searches, because it's some stuff I've never thought of, but it's really impressive.
All right. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming on and giving all this great information on Chester Clark Klingel, who, like I said, is just a great dark horse, and it's one of my favorites to talk about.
All right, I'll see you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, everybody. So that's it. Thanks a lot again to Julia for coming on. And I've remembered to put the final picture up. Of course, that's Patty batting there. And look at some of the characters. Did Corky make it in? Yeah, there's Corky, and of course, oh, this is Pittsburgh Pirates. You gotta like the Pirates. One of the great legacies in baseball. Thanks, Richard. Hey, Kathy. Thanks for everyone for tuning in the live chat. So I can't remember what date the Netflix documentary is going to come out. Who knows? Hopefully not. They'll probably burn a copy of my book on the documentary. Who knows? Maybe make Don Chaney out to be a good, swell guy. I don't know. I do remember, speaking of the documentary, of course, it's mostly going to be about the Sea Waters and their recollections of Arthur Lee Allen. I remember Dave saying that he was suspicious of Cheney. I can't remember where he said it, but he did. It's some on record somewhere. I remember Dave. Of course, Dave Seawater unfortunately passed away about a year and a half ago. So I'm assuming, you know, he'll be in the documentary. I guess they filmed it a while back before Dave passed, and I don't know if they'll address that or not. Thank you, Kathy. October 23rd. What day is that? That's going to be, so that's 10 days from now. Can't even get the calendar to come up, but I'll definitely cover that after it comes out. I'm going to watch it, of course, but who knows? I mean, hopefully they have something new, because like I've always said, there, you can't, it's hard to take Arthur Lee Allen out of this whole mixture. It's really difficult to do. But you know, hopefully they've uncovered something new that we haven't heard before. But you know, I think most of you guys had seen the Seawater's channel before they pulled it. And remember, somebody recorded all of their stuff and he put it back on YouTube, and then they threatened him like, "Hey, better take it down." I think whatever happened, but I guess YouTube took it down, or maybe they complained to YouTube and they took down all their stuff because he had screen recorded all the Seawater stuff. Of course, you know, the whole crescendo with that was, of course, Dave Seawater's statement about he called Arthur Lee Allen, and Arthur Lee Allen confessed to him over the telephone. Of course, there's no recording of this or anything. I think that was a big one. And then, you know, obviously when they said they were at Gaviota Beach, that's when a lot of people are like, I don't know, when Arthur Lee Allen comes back to the car. So, but anyway, it's something new at Zodiac. It's at least focused on Allen and not like Richard Hoffman, which is great. I mean, I don't know if they're going to give a show to the grandson where he's going to be like, it's him. But at least they're talking about Allen. So I think that's better than most. So at least we're somewhat over the target. We're, you know, in some ways, because I think that's something worth looking into, like all of it. Oh, thanks. I'm doing a video on that, Mike. I'm glad you brought that up. Of course, Mike is talking. I'm glad. Thanks for mentioning that. He's talking about Akbar's solution to the Z13 cipher, of course. And you know what his find was, what name he found in there. Of course, I like the find, of course, but I've never claimed to be a cipher guy. And in fact, when I did the documentary, they asked me, what are some tips you have for Zodiac Killer researchers? And one thing I said is never, ever try to tie your suspect to a cipher. And I never have, but I'm interested in them, of course. But one of the things I said is two things. Don't tie your suspect to a cipher like Harvey Hines did with Larry Kane. That was a big part of his deal with Larry Kane, was tying him to a cipher. Don't even try to be the cipher expert. We already have people that do that. And we know, you know, Dave and company. But another thing I said is don't tie your suspect to a non-canonical crime like Barry Essa or any other ones, even though they may be Zodiac. We don't know. But why would you want to tie your suspect mainly to a non-canonical crime like Ross Sullivan is with Riverside? It's another thing I said. But going back to it, he's done it. You know, the name he found fits well for the thing that he built. So, you know, but at the end of the day, from what I know about it, the Z13 is so short that there's always going to be multiple other ways to put other names in it, because it's just too short to be 100% sure, unfortunately. But he's put good work into it, and I encourage everybody to go check it out. And if you go to the community page here, where they now just say post, you know, where I put the postings for the shows, you can click on the link and go check out Akbar's solution to the Z13, which I am making a video about to kind of go over what I'm talking about now. But it's pretty cool. Thanks, Julia, for coming on. I love hearing about Klingel, and he's definitely interesting guy. I've learned, you know, new stuff about Klingel. I think he's a great dark horse suspect. You know, I'm a Cheney Allen guy. I remain that way, but I like looking into other things and connections, and you know, none of us were really there, so I hate to rule anything out. You know, especially that has good traction and smart people like Julia looking into it. And you know, I still like other theories. Like I said, I like Fred Manalli, the guy I just can't shake for some reason. And he's just one of the ones that I personally like to look into. It's like King Manalli and so a few others too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the documentary, and just brings a whole new fresh amount of people coming into the case, and they go searching on YouTube after they watch it. So I'm definitely going to do a video, maybe one before and one after they air the video, which I still can't believe they're calling it This is the Zodiac Speaking, when that's already the name of the documentary that came out with the Fincher film. I don't know if that's going to confuse some things or not. I think they should have made it a little different. I mean, it's a great title because it comes from the letters, but why would you? I mean, because This is the Zodiac Speaking is still the Hallmark documentary. You have Hartnell in it. You have Mike Michaud in it. When you'll never get those guys again to do that. I mean, you'll never get Hartnell again. I can tell you that ever. He's still alive, but you're not going to get him to do another interview. That was a Fincher thing, and his son talked him into it. You'll never get that again. That's why that's the Hallmark Zodiac documentary of all time. So why would you let this Netflix deal with the Sea Waters? I mean, I'm not putting that down, but why would you even want to have that? If I own the original that came out the Fincher film, I don't want them calling theirs what mine is personally, because you're not going to have Michaud and Hartnell and all this. I don't know. I don't know why they would allow that same name, because from what I know, that's what they're calling it. A little crazy. But that being said, everybody have a good week. Thanks again to Julia for coming on. That's great information. It's fascinating, and it's amazing research going on. And it's good to know people like Julia and Druser and Richard and just great researchers. Or, one day they're going to turn up something that's just going to be like, whoa, and then it's all going to make sense is my hope. But everybody have a good week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.